This is a story my mother told me about her experiences during a difficult period in American history, amidst the backdrop of war. It was a harsh era, and at the time, my mother's family lived in a secluded mountain village in the United States, somewhat shielded from the full brunt of the conflict due to their remote location. They were among the luckier ones. My mother had just come of age during this brutal period. Despite the ability of her family to be self-sufficient, she would occasionally venture deeper into the mountains to gather wild vegetables to help support her family's situation. One day, while alone on a mountain path, she found a person lying in a grassy clearing. Approaching, she discovered it was a young soldier in uniform, his body covered in insect bites and alarmingly thin. She had heard stories of individuals who, unwilling to face the battlefield, deserted and hid in the mountains. Assuming this man was one such deserter, she gently shook him awake. The young man, upon seeing my mother, weakly requested water. She immediately provided him with some, which he drank eagerly. After asking if he was hungry and receiving a nod, she gave him a rice ball from her pack, which he devoured quickly. Inquiring how he ended up there, the soldier candidly shared that his unit was about to be sent to the front lines, but he didn't want to die. To escape, he and a comrade fled, hoping to make it back home. However, while traversing the mountains, his friend injured his foot and could no longer walk, forcing them to take refuge on the mountain. They had been hiding there for a while, surviving on dwindling supplies and natural resources until both food and water ran out. With his comrade's condition worsening, the soldier decided to surrender in hopes of getting help for his friend. Overcome by exhaustion, he collapsed in the meadow where my mother found him. Moved by his story, my mother gave him the rest of her water and food, then helped him to a nearby tree, instructing him to wait while she went to fetch help from the village. She returned with 4 adults, food, and water, and they ventured back into the mountains to find the soldier. However, upon reaching the resting spot, they found no one. Following footprints into the woods, they searched until sunset without success and were about to give up when my mother spotted a cave not far ahead. Approaching the entrance, she heard voices inside. Listening, she recognized the young soldier's voice, thanking someone for water and expressing a longing to see his parents, though he believed it was no longer possible. The other voice encouraged him, mentioning that help might be on the way thanks to a recent encounter. Rallying the others, they entered the cave, finding the young soldier crying beside the body of his comrade, which was now just a skeleton in a uniform. Despite their shock, they carried the remains back to the village, where it was buried in a quiet corner of the cemetery. The young soldier, severely malnourished, was taken in by my mother's family and slowly recovered. He lived in the village for a while before deciding to return to his hometown and reunite with his family, intending to also bring his comrades' remains home. The villagers helped exhume the skeleton, which he took with him. That young soldier was my father. I once asked my mother how she could have heard them conversing at the cave entrance if my father's comrade had already passed away. She suggested that the isolation and stress might have caused my father to hallucinate his friend's presence. Despite this, my father insisted that he had spoken with his friend every day on the mountain and had taken care of him until the villagers arrived. He even claimed to have seen his friend's face clearly when giving him water just before the rescue. After leaving the mountain village with my mother, they brought his comrades' remains back to his family for burial. My father, throughout his life, would visit his friend's grave every year. Whether my father was speaking to his friend's spirit or to an illusion of his own making, I like to think that the presence of his comrade helped him survive those desperate times. When I served in the U.S. Army, the training was round the clock. Sometimes we even trained deep into the night, which were days when we hardly got enough sleep, but they were incredibly fulfilling nonetheless. I remember one training session that took place in the mountains. During that session, each of us had to carry more than 20 pounds of equipment, and walk a long distance to reach a designated spot. It was a lengthy journey. As I walked, I watched the other team members ahead of me. Suddenly, one of the team members stumbled and fell, landing on his bottom. At first, I thought maybe he just lost his balance, but then he kept falling over and over again. The other team members began to worry and asked him if he was okay. He himself was puzzled and shook his head in confusion. However, he kept falling every so often. Although it was baffling to both his teammates and himself, during his subsequent falls, I saw what was happening. I actually saw a little boy jump onto the backpack of that team member, and each time the boy forcefully stepped on the backpack, the team member would fall. Moreover, the boy had an indescribable and terrifying smile, giggling and repeating this action. I instinctively felt that the boy was dangerous, so I pretended not to see him to avoid his attention. However, the little boy started to go too far. He began to grab the team member's hand and drag him forward. Since I felt it was dangerous for the team member to be treated this way, I quickly walked up to him, grabbed his shoulder firmly, and pulled him back. He immediately stepped back a few steps, and it was only when we both stopped that I realized the team member was just a step away from falling off a cliff. We both breathed a sigh of relief. But the moment after I saved the team member, I locked eyes with the boy. His eyes were filled with hostility, staring at me before he suddenly disappeared. The team member I pulled back looked at me, pale and on the verge of tears, and thanked me. He told me he didn't understand why that was happening to him. I thought we were safe after the boy disappeared, and the incident was over. We continued to follow the team, walking through the mountains. As the journey went on, I felt more and more exhausted, and my steps became heavier. The intensity of the training was really challenging, and I felt like I was about to lose my way. However, at that moment, the boy suddenly appeared, grabbed my hand, and forcefully pulled me towards the cliff at the side. I couldn't make a sound nor resist, and I fell off the cliff headfirst. It felt like time had stopped, and I thought to myself, I was going to die. Fortunately, there was a large tree right below the spot I fell, and during my fall, I felt a force helping me. Suddenly, the sensation of falling disappeared for a moment, and then my feet got caught in the dense branches, stopping me from falling further, leaving me hanging upside down in the tree. But when I realized I was still alive and looked up at the top of the cliff, I saw the boy standing there. He had a malicious expression on his face and said to me, "Damn, you were supposed to die." Then he disappeared immediately. It was indeed a very close call. If anything had gone slightly wrong, I really would have died. Thinking back, the force that helped me when I fell off the cliff was probably my deceased grandfather saving my life. Because when I was falling, besides being scared and panicked, I was actually screaming inside, "Grandpa, save me, please. I don't want to go see you so soon." During my service in the United States Navy, I was assigned as a conscripted naval vessel soldier to a historic warship that was used by the U.S. in World War II. My duty was as an oil machine soldier, essentially dealing with machines and oil water at the bottom of the ship. Fortunately, I was stationed in the engine office, which, despite being busy and often requiring overtime, spared me some of the physical labor. One night, as usual, I worked late until about 12:30 a.m. After organizing the documents, I prepared to distribute them to the first, second, third, and main engine rooms. That night, after chatting with a senior in the first engine room, I headed to the second engine room. The second engine room is the boiler room, which is usually silent at this time since no machinery operates, creating a particularly quiet environment. It was in this quietness that I encountered something strange. After descending the ladder to the second engine room, I saw half a body of someone entering through the front door, wearing Navy training shoes, seemingly a new recruit. I immediately went back, hoping to see him, and called out the name of the new person in the second engine room, but there was no one inside. I felt a chill and hurried back to the ladder, ready to return. However, as I rushed up the ladder, I heard an out-of-sync set of footsteps following me. When I was about to move from the first to the second floor, I found a pair of Navy training shoes on the platform behind me, which was impossible. If the shoes had been there all along, I would have seen them when I came down. Ignoring everything, I immediately rushed back to my bed, not even daring to take a shower that night, and unknowingly fell asleep. The next morning at the assembly, I told a senior in the second engine room, who had been there for several years, about the incident. The senior said, "What you encountered, I've encountered long ago, and I've even come across more things you haven't." Since then, whenever I needed to distribute documents to the second engine room, I would fold the papers into paper airplanes and throw them downstairs, knowing someone would eventually find them the next day.